I am Rebecca, and this is Enfants, my podcast. Together with some of the boldest voices in education, we explore what young children really need to thrive. From why standardization holds them back, to how traditional classrooms no longer meet their needs. In this podcast, you will discover the latest ideas and tips to help children thrive as they were born to. Today, we are exploring what the happiest country in the world can teach us about parenting with our guest, Jessica Joelle Alexander. Jessica is a renowned parenting expert and best-selling author whose work has been featured in major publications like the New York Times, BBC World News, Time Magazine, or the Huffington Post. Her book, The Danish Way of Parenting, is among the most popular parenting books in the world and has been translated to over 35 languages. Jessica has also collaborated with Lego as a spokesperson for the power of play and travels the world sharing insights on parenting. Let's welcome Jessica. Hello, Jessica.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I'm really happy to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
The first question I wanted to ask you is, Denmark is constantly ranked as one of the happiest country. Mauritius is ranked 70th in the world. How much do you think that it's linked to the parenting style that Danish people have?
I think it's very linked. I think it's very linked to the parenting and the education system here. It's very different than any place that I've ever seen. And I'm American, but I've lived in many countries. So my husband is Danish, and I definitely noticed something was different with the kids from early on, and the parenting. And so I've been sort of studying this for the past 20 years now, I guess, and I only get more and more convinced that it is definitely very much the reason for their continued well-being for 40 years in a row. Yeah.
To follow up, I think one thing that's important to say that I read on other podcasts or books that you wrote is that it's not something that's only for Denmark. It can be applicable to anywhere else in the world. So I just wanted to put that here because often we hear, but Denmark is different, blah, blah, blah. But I think you are doing your research and the tips that you give or the advice it's applicable to anywhere else in the world. So maybe my follow-up question will be, what's the one thing that Danes do differently when it comes to parenting?
I think, well, there's many things, but if I would say one thing that I think is really striking compared to many other cultures is their deep belief in a child's need to play. So we know, I mean, I've been writing about this for 15 years, but we know now, it's becoming much more talked about now. Science is now showing how important free play is for children, and allowing them time to, explore, create, choose what they want to play without adult, intervening and preparing everything and having planned activities and organized activities. So, the research is clearly showing now that it's beneficial for empathy, negotiation skills, resilience, critical thinking, creativity. I mean, it goes on and on. But I think because these are skills that you can't measure with a grade or a prize or a trophy or something, parents think they're being lazy if they allow their kids to play. But it's funny, despite, like I said, I work with a lot of parenting experts and triple PhD people that are, having whole conferences talking about the power of play. And I'm saying, like, just imagine there's this country where everybody agrees that it's the best thing. So you actually, and you can just see it. You see it here, how much more serene the kids are. And it's not that Danes don't grow up to be ambitious. Oops. They don't grow up to be ambitious or successful or any of these things. It's just, I think that they have it also helps you with your sense of self and self-esteem to be able to have more freedom to sort of choose what you want to play. Also, we know now that, for example, risky play, which is, this idea of like letting kids climb trees and in Denmark at 3 they learn how to sharpen, to make like I forget what you call them, whittle sticks with knives. Um, all of these things are teaching children how to cope with fear. And we also know now that the more that they're able to control their own fear, and only the child knows what they can handle. Nobody else knows that. So when they're able to push themselves and pull back and push themselves, this is actually sort of setting the groundwork for coping mechanisms. So we've seen a direct correlation between a rise in anxiety in the last 50 years and a decline in play. And a lot of scientists think that this is because children are not allowed to sort of develop their natural coping mechanisms to deal with anxiety, which actually comes from risky play. So, but it's very hard to convince people that think that they have to have their kids learning English and math and all these things at age 4, and then they don't understand why their children are anxious. And so that's probably one of the biggest differences, just generally that I think everybody can see and relate to is play.
You talked about math reading. It made me think about school. I think they don't start school, if I'm not mistaken, until the age of 6. And before I read something that said that 93% of children under 3 went to daycare, which is, I think, the highest participation rate of all the EU. And also they spent more than 30 hours, which is also per week in daycare. What's the role of daycare in this happiness that Danes have?
Mhm.
Do they allow a lot of play? What is particular that they do with
I
the
mean,
children below the age of 3? That is it contributing also, do you think, or is it only the parenting style, or does school has a role to play also?
I think all of it has a role. Full disclosure, I didn't raise my kids most of the time in Denmark. So I'm also telling people that's why I know that this can work outside of Denmark. So I can comment on this, but I think that this can be sort of replicated anywhere. Um, and I also believe that, some of the positive things that exist in Denmark, like around the social system, for example, it comes also from parenting and education. Because if we raise our children with more free play, with more empathy, I think they grow up to make the system better for parents and better for kids because it is the future. But for sure, daycare, I think, first of all, the quality is just generally good. So, you don't have the need, I think, as you do in other countries, like you never know what you're getting, right? Like sometimes you can get a terrible school and you can get a good school, or you have to go to a private school. Here, I think across the board, it's very, very solid, right? It's not like luxury at all, but kids don't need that. I always say it's like less is more. It's very much about simplicity. They have a lot of, for example, forest kindergarten, which means basically kids are just outside from morning to night, come rain, snow, sleet, hail. They just believe that this is really healthy and good for kids. Um, and yeah, I would say that it's very much about consistency and play, um, and helping children learn to regulate. They also teach empathy very young. This is a massive part of their schooling system from as soon as they can not even speak. Like they're working on helping them to like think about others, to read each other's emotions. Um, they have, yeah, there's a lot of very interesting ways that they focus on empathy, I would say, in education and parenting, which is very different than I've ever seen.
Yes, definitely different than in Mauritius. in Mauritius there is still a culture of academics matters a lot. Grades and pressure on kids. The more you study, the more you will succeed. I've seen it's quite an old study. I think it was 2016 or something, but that Danes had the fifth, I think, genius per capita. Um, yeah, were ranked fifth in this, and then that they also were the happiest country in the world. What would you say to parents in Mauritius focusing on academics? What should they focus instead on if they want their child to be successful, obviously, and happy?
Well, I can say I had the same, because in America it's the same. We have a big focus on academics. So I was a little bit like, I converted to the Danish way. I was totally obsessed with my daughter having educational toys and watching Baby Einstein and making sure that she, I mean, so it took a lot of like discussions with my husband and then seeing how it was in Denmark, that I thought, okay, wait a minute, maybe this is a better way. And in order to do that, like when I finally realized, okay, I could understand that all kids, there's something called the hurried child syndrome, which is really on the rise now. And basically it's this idea that, all children will learn to read and write and do math at a certain age, but every child is different. So some might learn it at 5 and some will learn it at 9. But the child that is pushed and pressured to learn it when they're not ready, it affects their self-esteem, it affects their self-confidence for life. A child that is allowed, that it's, we're like plants. We're organic. All children do not fit in one little box. So it's also a lot about reading your kids. And the more that they have time to sort of, yes, not be pressured into learning, because they will learn, right? And actually in Denmark, play is considered an educational theory. It is the highest form of learning for a child. It's been an educational theory since 1871. It's never gone out of style because they believe it is the highest form of learning for a child. And so, I can just say in my own experience, when I finally decided, okay, I'm going to back off, I believe that my daughter will learn and she will be fine. I backed off. And maybe this was like when she was 2 or 3 or something, 3 maybe. And I got a group of friends that believed in the same things. And we agreed that we believed in free play, and we believed that, because the problem is that you get pressure from other parents. So it's hard to say my child is just playing when they're saying my daughter's in Russian math and ballet and horseback riding and, a million activities every day. So we kind of made a tribe of friends that believed the same thing. And on the weekends, we would have picnics, or we would go to the beach, or we would go to the forest, and we would allow them to play. And I saw a difference in my daughter, and I saw how much happier she was. I saw how much happier we were as a family. And she is incredibly academic, my daughter now. And moreover, I would say she's probably she's so balanced. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that you can be as smart and as academic as you want, but if you're insecure and your whole sense of self is dependent on a good grade or a job or money, you're not going to be very happy. So I always say that, so there's a characteristic in Danish, which is at hvile i sig selv, and it means to rest well within yourself. So it basically means that you feel okay with or without all the awards, and the grades and the academics and stuff like that. And I always say it's like, this doesn't mean you won't be ambitious. It just means that whether you walk on the moon or whether you walk on a beach, you'll rest well within yourself. And this is real well-being. This is happiness. And that takes knowing that your parents love you no matter what you do. And what happens with all this focus on academics is that it feels conditional to a child. It feels that your love is conditional on me performing. And that is where the sort of the difficulties come in, and that's where insecurity comes in, and that's where anxiety comes in. And the fact of the matter is, the future is changing. There is AI, there's technology, and you can be as academically smart as you want to, but we're not even going to compare to a computer. So the skills that we need for the future are far more about creativity, collaboration, empathy, and I think that's something to really keep in mind as a parent.
Wow, what you're saying is so profound, and yeah, the experience also, it's great to see like a real example of your daughter of how you were like a, you know, the mindset of academics, how you changed and how it impacted your daughter. You talked about well-being. There's a sad, I would say, statistic in Mauritius that 54% of Mauritian thinks that it's sometimes or always justified to use the to use physical punishment to discipline the kids. What would you say to the yeah to that, and what other discipline methods could you tell Mauritian parents to use instead, and is why would it be better for the kids?
So I was raised in a family where spanking was normal. I came from a very authoritarian family. Before, when our kids, my daughter was very, very little, even a baby, I think I was obsessed with discipline. I was like, how are we going to discipline? What are we going to do when she disobeys? And my husband, my Danish husband, was just completely confused. Like, why are you so obsessed with discipline? He really could not understand it, and I couldn't understand him. And then as we talked about it and talked about it, I realized that in Denmark, spanking has been illegal for over 20 years. It's like an unthinkable way of educating a child. And it's there's much more of a belief that they call it equal dignity, that children are extremely competent and worthy of respect from like the time they're babies. And like the last thing that a Danish parent wants is for their child to fear them, because they feel like you have a far more powerful sphere of influence if they respect you. So their whole goal is to make sure their children respect them, not to fear them. And so this is very different for me. And it's still a learning process for me, because I talk a lot about cultural differences and how, I call it's like it's what's programmed into us, like a motherboard on a computer. So this is called parental ethnotheories. I call it our cultural default settings, because it's what we return to when we're stressed, when we crash, so I understand the desire to go back to like the old ways or how you were raised or what's happening. But I firmly now believe that, wow, you get so much more out of respect-based parenting. It's a cycle that comes back to you, especially in the teen years. It's, give respect, you get respect. I would say that how do they do this is that, first of all, they try to avoid going into power struggles as much. A lot of times power struggles tend to be actually like a default setting, because of the way we talk, because of the tone we take, because of the language we use, immediately using threats, just because it's a habit for a lot of us. Yeah, I mean, just seeing the child as having their own feelings, senses, needs, integrity, and keeping that in the forefront of your mind. And that doesn't mean you don't have boundaries, and that doesn't mean you absolutely not. This is not permissive parenting. It's just, you can enforce boundaries respectfully. And like, one of the things I think to ask is, how would you want to be treated? I mean, and if you see children as little people that just need guidance, you would never hit them again. It's like who else are we allowed to hit? But somehow we're 10 times bigger than kids, and that's okay. So I have really changed. So it's not to put any judgment on anything. It's just to say, like, I came from this background. I totally understand it. I get it. Like in America, you can still they still have corporal punishment in schools in some states, you know, so it's still happening. But it's interesting when you start looking around. There's a lot of countries where it's illegal.
It's
So yeah,
actually
first things
illegal, I
first.
think, since 2020 or something, but yeah, we still do it. But yeah, it's
Yeah, exactly. I
became
mean,
legal.
it's there's places where it's just again, it's so much a part of the culture and it's so much a part of the beliefs. But I would also say, you know, there's a lot of research now on spanking or on hitting. And I mean, a long meta studies over many, many years, and there is not one positive outcome from using that method with a child. So, I mean, it's like a lot of people say, I was the same. They say, well, I feel I'm okay. I was spanked, but I turned out okay. But, you know, that's like saying I smoked my whole life and I'm fine. You know, that doesn't make smoking okay. But again, like I know it's hard. I would say, yeah, I would encourage to read. We write a lot about it in the Danish way of parenting, and it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress for sure.
You talked about discipline, and sometimes we want our child to sit to eat, we want them to sleep alone, we want them to be quiet in front of other people. How to know as a parent when the child is ready or not, when he's just not cooperating and he's just ready but not doing it, and we have to maybe push it a little bit more, and when that how to know when they're ready or not ready.
I mean, that's a lot of questions in one.
Yeah, sorry.
Um, so that those are a lot of things, and I think every family is individual and every situation is individual, and so it's, you know, it's very difficult to say like a blanket statement over, you know, when they're ready to sleep or eat or all these things. It's very, like I said, it's very specific from family to family, situation to situation. But coming back to this idea of empathy, and it's very much also about like understanding what's going on in your child's life, understanding what developmental stage they're at, what's healthy for that age. I talk a lot about something called reframing, which is changing the words you use around children, which often also changes the way you respond to them. For an example, in Denmark, they don't call the toddler years the terrible twos like we do in English. So you expect them to be terrible. You're like so annoyed because they're being, you know, they're not listening and they're tantrums and all these things. In Denmark, they call it trods or the boundary pushing age. So they see this age as like totally healthy. When they push back, it's what they're supposed to do. It shows they're growing in the right way. And you can't believe that just that one change in how you see this developmental stage affects the way you respond. And you can see how different the relationship is here of toddlers and parents. Like you don't hear the yelling in the same, like I whenever I hear yelling, honestly, it's almost always a foreigner. It's really funny. It's like it's become a game for me. I'm like, I'm gonna go see who, you know, if these are Danish parents. But of course they have many years of practice on this, but I used this, I live in Denmark now, but for most of the time I was raising my children, I was not. And you can use a lot of this philosophy other places, and it does work.
You talked about self-esteem early on, how it's important to for schools or even parents to build self-esteem first. In your book, you highlight the difference between self-esteem and confidence. I found it super interesting. I yeah, never thought that it was actually different, and why you must have self-esteem more than confidence, or maybe self-esteem first then confidence. Could you talk a bit more about it, because I found this difference quite interesting.
Mhm. Mhm. So most people think that they're the same, self-esteem and self-confidence, but in Denmark they make a big distinction between the two, and they often use a diagram of a tree to describe it. So like in the beginning of school, uh, headmasters will often like talk to parents to give this kind of presentation so that they know, and they understand that it's important to nourish both. So the tree, they show the foliage of the tree as self-confidence. So these are the things you can see. This is like what you're good at. It's your grades, it's your sports abilities, it's how popular you are. Um, all those kinds of things that are visible. It's the things you can do. Self-esteem is much more, it's like the roots. So it's what you cannot see. It's the quality of your meaningful relationships. It's how you feel about yourself as a person, regardless of what you can do. It's hobbies that you like to do because you genuinely like to do them, not because you're proving something to someone else. So what often happens is that because we see the things that are on the, like we can see grades, we can see measurements in academic performance, parents spend a lot of time focusing on that, which kind of comes back to what we talked about earlier, and little time on fostering those roots of being together, letting your child know you like being with them, involving them in the everyday, like strangely doing chores together helps children feel like they're needed. Um, yeah, we call it hygge. That's another Danish concept, spending a lot of hygge time. But so
Could you explain more about this concept of hygge? Because I think you benefited a lot from it as a parent and as a family,
yeah,
and it's yeah, it's a specific
it's a
Danish
big
concept.
concept, but just in a nutshell, hygge is essentially it's like it's carving out sort of drama-free time with your family where you're very much in the moment, you're very present, and it's where you leave all your work stress, your phone, everything out so that you just have time, cozy time together where you focus on we and not me. And this is also really fostering those roots because that's where children feel like no matter what I'm doing, for better or for worse, in this space, I'm loved for who I am. So, we all know those people that have tons of money and awards and PhDs, and they look like they have this huge, rich foliage on a tree, and you would think that they're so happy, but oftentimes a lot of people grow up, and because there's been so much focus on that as their only base of being good enough, so you can imagine how their roots are. So what happens when the storm of life comes? They crumble, they topple over. So what they kind of enforce here is to be really aware and really value both. It's not one or the other. They'd want you to try to make them equal so that no matter what happens in your life, you can be stable. And if anybody has met many Danish people, like you can actually see this quality in them. They're very sort of grounded, very no need to brag, no need to because they feel pretty like that's not what their worth is based on. And for me as an adult, that has completely changed my life as a parent, as how I see parenting, as how I want my children to be in the world, because like, wow, when you're able to let go of that need to perform, show all these things, to be when you sort of rest well within yourself, I think that's the epitome of, yeah, well-being.
You just talked about how they don't have to brag. You talk about the link also between praising and self-esteem and how to praise in a good way, I would say. Could you explain more about that? What's the wrong way to praise and what's the good way to praise?
I mean, again, I always avoid saying wrong and right way because I think there's a lot of ways, and I think you just have to find the way that's right for you. So I try to stay out of any judgment on that. We all have our own ways. And by the way, every culture has something fantastic about it. And I don't think the Danish way is like, like the only way. And I always make a point to say, like, I'm not trying to export Denmark at all. I just think that there's some core values here that are amazing that, we took pizza from Italy, like I think there's some parenting values that are really good. But in terms of the praise, I think praising more of in a way that's like about your child's experience. So for example, if your child draws a picture, like just scribbles a picture, like I would say the American way would be to say something like, oh my God, you are like, wow, you are an awesome artist. You know, something totally exaggerated in a way. And you know, good job, that's amazing. And so this almost becomes like, rather than just acknowledging what your child is doing, because they just want you to see them, they want to share with you, it's assessing. You know the difference,
It
right?
puts pressure
One is
on them.
acknowledging,
Yeah.
one is, or like, so I think a Danish would say something like, oh wow, why did you choose those colors? What were you thinking when you drew this?
Or just
Um,
commenting. It's yeah, you draw a
or
dog and
thank
I'm
you.
sad that yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Or, you know, or when you're, you know, like cooking together, or like I said, these kinds of things are really good for like creating that hygge, creating that nice connection. Um, just acknowledging like, oh, that looks fun. Oh, I see you're enjoying that. Or how many, you know, how much. So it's just being in the moment and acknowledging and seeing and mirroring, rather than saying, which is a cultural default setting for many of us. I mean, God, and I'm American, believe me, it's like it's in me. You know, good job. Oh, excellent. Did you just count to two? Can you, what a, you know, that's fine. I'm not saying you don't have to do that too, but there is something about also just acknowledging, so that your child knows that, like, you know, they can just be in the moment and they don't have to
You.
perform.
Mm,
I would say that's a big difference. Focusing on the process rather than the result.
interesting. And another thing that you talk about is linked to self-esteem again, and why Danes are also happy is the resilience. How do Danes cultivate resilience in their kids, and why is it important?
Well, this would come, I would say, to more the education, also the parenting, but like, first of all, free play, risky play, huge area where they build resilience. As I said to you before, in risky play, children test themselves. They know how far they can push themselves. They can I jump off that rock? How far can I go? You know, how fast can I run? And it's so tempting to go. I can't tell you how many times I would want to tell my son to stop running and slow down. And my husband would say, he's a boy. He has to run, you know? And I was like, "Oh," you know, like, ah, you know, but I know what he means. This is, you know, and he will fall down and he has fallen down, but that's also part of life. That's resilience. You will fall down, but the more opportunities you get to try and fail and try and fail, and not demonize failing. That's a big thing in their education. In education in Denmark, they have a lot of opportunity to fail. And I don't just mean getting a bad grade, because their education system is just so different. It's like they do so many different things than academics. You know, you have a lot of, they give them a lot of opportunity to create something or build something or work on a project together or whatever. And like, it's, fail is first attempt in learning. That's what fail stands for.
Mm,
So it's
interesting.
part of the process. And so I remember a funny thing was like, in one of the Danish girl was telling me about, in her English class, they didn't put up the best English paper. They took the worst so that they could all learn from the mistakes rather than the perfect paper. And there was no stigma around it. And that's, again, like, if you hear any successful person, they'll always tell you they learned the most from their failures. But we are so afraid of letting our kids fail, and we want them to be perfect, and we want them to get the best grades. But actually, if you look at the research, we learn the most from failing and the ability to get back up. So I think starting from risky play and all the freedom they get to play, they get to practice trying, falling, getting back up, trying, falling, getting back up. Learning how to, I mean, this is where I'm saying education, learning how to read a map, learning how to go through the forest, learning how to bake a cake. Believe it or not, all of these things help you become more resilient.
Two last questions before we're finished. The first one is about the two most the two concepts which impacted me the most when reading your book. First was about emotional honesty. How is it is more important than perfection. And the second one is how never to always have your child's back in front of people, because you wouldn't say something against your wife or your husband in front of people. So why would you not say maybe something bad, just contradict him or her in front of people? So always have your child's back and not care much about what people are thinking, but more about the well-being of your child. So these were the two quotes or two concepts that struck me the most. Maybe if you want to pick one of the two and just elaborate on one of these two.
Well, I think emotional honesty is has a lot of facets to it. But it's I think a lot of parents, they want to be right, and they want to be the one that knows the best, and we have a hard time being vulnerable. We have a hard time saying sorry. We have a hard time admitting when we're having a bad day or when we're going through something difficult, because we think we're protecting children by not telling them. And I think the mentality here, and what has helped me a lot really change as a parent, and I know I have a much better relationship with my kids because I have been able to be more vulnerable. I'm not superhuman. I'm a mom, but that doesn't mean I'm superhuman. I'm just a woman, right? And I have feelings, and I have bad days, and I have go through hard times, and I don't act the way I wish I could have, and I screw up. And I think the ability to be able to say this to your children in an age appropriate way, obviously, as they grow and as they change, it lets them know that they are okay and what they feel is okay, and that they are also human. And this is incredibly connecting. And I think as they get older, particularly in the teen years, your relationship with them is the best protection you will have. It's not going to be all the controls, locking them up in a jail, spying on them. The best protection you can have is coming back to this respect and the genuine, closeness you can sort of cultivate over the years. And I think that this honesty and vulnerability, they know they can trust you. I mean, kids are incredible hypocrite detectors. Incredible. So the more honest you can be in an age appropriate way, the more they will respect you. And that comes to this idea, if you believe that respect is more powerful than fear, then it starts with, being a good role model and living up to what you're sort of, asking of them as well.
Amazing.
I don't know, answered it.
Yeah. You picked the first one. And the last question, if you know how parenting can be tough sometimes, you can be guilty of not doing your best, and there's always things that you could have done better. But if there was one advice that you could give, if you were to leave this world today, and one advice that really changed your life, or that you've seen change the life of parents in the better, help them maybe in their parenting, make it easier, make it less stressful, less more enjoyable, what would you say it would be? It's
I
soft.
mean, this
Sorry.
no, this encompasses a lot, but it is something that I say because I think it's so true, and it has a lot behind it. I mean, it's this idea of teach respect, be respectful, and you will be respected. So there's a lot under that, but I do think it's the absolute key to raising, to being a happier family in general. I think it means a lot, and figuring out what that means for you, and figuring out what that means for your children, and then really following through on what it means to be respectful. I think it comes back to you tenfold. And that's a fantastic feeling when you feel it coming back to you. Really. It's a good feeling.
Amazing. Thanks, Jessica. It was so nice having you today. I learned so much, and I'm sure so many parents and educators will also in Mauritius. Thanks for your time. Well done for the wonderful work you are doing. Please continue. Please publish more books.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.